Ever have one of those moments where you wonder if you've made a colossal mistake? Not a small one, like taking a wrong turn and ending up on a scenic detour. I'm talking about a life-altering, what have we done, kind of mistake. We had our moment standing on the shoulder of a serpentine road in the Italian Dolomites, the silence broken only by the ticking of our cooling engine and the frantic thumping of my own heart. This wasn't exactly how we planned our day, but as is so often the case on this journey of ours, it turned into one of our most defining stories. It's a story about why trading a life of routine for the complete unknown after 50 isn't just possible, it's essential. The morning had started with the kind of perfection that feels scripted. We woke up parked in a designated, Sosta camper area just outside a village so picturesque it looked like it had been carved from gingerbread and granite. The air was thin and cold, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Through the back doors of our van, which we affectionately call the Wanderer, the peaks of the Dolomites were still cloaked in a soft, pinkish alpenglow. Coffee's ready, Karen's voice was warm, a familiar comfort in this profoundly unfamiliar landscape. She handed me a steaming mug, her smile as bright as the emerging sun. We sat on the edge of our pull-out bed, feet dangling just above the van floor, and watched the world wake up. This was the ritual. This was the payoff. For 30 years, our mornings had been a symphony of blaring alarms, rushed breakfasts, and the predictable rhythm of getting ready for jobs that had long ago lost their luster. Now, our alarm was the sun, and our biggest decision was which direction to point the Wanderer. So, the big one today? I asked, taking a sip of the strong, dark coffee. Paso Joao. Karen nodded, her eyes tracing the jagged skyline. If we're going to do it, today's the day. The forecast is perfect. No clouds, no rain. Just us and the mountains. Paso Joao. It was one of those legendary alpine passes you see in car commercials and cycling magazines. A ribbon of asphalt draped over a colossal mountain, with hairpin turns so tight they looked like they'd been tied in a knot. It was a challenge, a spectacle, and the very reason we'd brought our home on wheels to this corner of the world. The plan was simple: drive up, take 1,000 photos, have a leisurely lunch with a world-class view, and then coast down the other side to our next destination. We spent the next hour preparing. It's a dance we perfected over thousands of miles. I checked the oil and tires, a habit ingrained from a costly lesson in rural Spain. Karen, the master of organization, secured everything inside the van. In a space this small, a loose bottle of olive oil on a steep incline can become a catastrophic event. Every pot, pan, and plate had its place, held fast by bungee cords and clever latches. Everything battened down. I called out, closing the hood. "Ready for a 45-degree tilt, Captain," she replied with a mock salute. Her humor was a constant, a ballast that kept us steady no matter the seas. With everything secure, we pulled out of our quiet spot, waving to a German couple in a massive motorhome who were still extending their satellite dish. We felt nimble, free, ready for the adventure. The first part of the drive was a gentle climb through verdant valleys, past charming wooden chalets with overflowing flower boxes. The road was smooth, the engine hummed its happy tune, and the world outside our windows was a canvas of impossible greens and grays. "This is it," Karen said softly, her hand resting on my shoulder. "This is what we dreamed about." She was right. In our old life, a day like this would have been a fantasy, a daydream conjured during a boring meeting. Now, it was just Tuesday. The sheer, unadulterated freedom of it was still something that could stop me in my tracks. As we began the Real ascent, the road narrowed and the turns grew sharper. The Wanderer, a trusty but heavy-laden Fiat Ducato, was working hard. I kept the rev steady, shifting down for the tight corners, feeling the pull of the grade. We passed cyclists, their faces a mixture of agony and ecstasy, and motorcyclists who leaned into the curves with a grace we could only envy. With each turn, the view became more dramatic. The valleys fell away, replaced by sheer rock faces and scree slopes. We were climbing into the heart of the giants. And that's when it happened. It started subtly. A slight hesitation in the engine's rhythm. A flicker of the battery light on the dashboard, so quick I thought I'd imagined it. Did you feel that? I asked, my knuckles widening on the steering wheel. Feel what? Karen was busy trying to capture a photo of a waterfall cascading down the rock face opposite us. A little stutter, I said, my eyes glued to the instrument panel. The battery light flickered again, this time staying on for a full second. My stomach tightened. In a van, warning lights are not suggestions, they are omens. Then came the smell. A faint, acrid scent of burning rubber. Okay, something's definitely not right, I said, my voice more tense than I intended. Karen lowered her phone. What is it? I don't know. A belt, maybe? Smells like it. The road ahead offered a small pull-out, a gravel patch barely wider than the van itself, carved into the mountainside. A flimsy-looking wooden guardrail was the only thing separating it from a several hundred-foot drop. I eased the wanderer into the space, the engine sounding rougher now, weaker. I turned the key. The engine died with a pathetic sigh, and a profound, unnerving silence descended upon us. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. Just a single, disheartening click. We looked at each other. The perfect, scripted day had just had its pages ripped out. We were halfway up a remote mountain pass in a foreign country, with no cell service and a 2.5-ton paperweight. The moment of "what have we done" had arrived, right on schedule. My first reaction was a wave of pure, unadulterated panic. My mind raced through a Rolodex of worst-case scenarios. Tow trucks that wouldn't come up this high. Repair bills that would swallow our budget for the next 3 months. The logistical nightmare of it all. I am, by nature, the worrier of our duo. I see the storm cloud behind every silver lining. I got out and opened the hood, staring at the complex tangle of hoses and wires as if I could diagnose it by sheer force of will. The smell of burned rubber was stronger now. I could see the serpentine belt, or what was left of it. It was shredded, its black entrails wrapped around the pulleys like a dead snake. The alternator wasn't turning. The battery wasn't charging. That explained the light, and the silence. Well, there's your problem, I said, a little too dramatically. I slammed the hood shut with more force than necessary. Great. Just, great. Stranded. Karen got out of the van and came to stand beside me. She didn't look at the engine. She looked at the view. The peaks across the valley were so close we could see the patches of old snow clinging to their crevices. The air was still, and the only sound was a distant cowbell. Okay, she said, her voice impossibly calm. So, we have a broken belt. The engine won't start. We have no phone signal. We're on the side of a mountain. She listed the facts as if she were taking inventory for a grocery trip. You're forgetting the sheer drop into oblivion just to your left, I added glumly. She ignored me. But, she continued, turning to face me, we have water. We have a pantry full of food. We have a comfortable bed. And we have that, she pointed across the valley. Worst case scenario, we camp in the most spectacular spot of our entire trip. It's not the end of the world, John. This is Karen's superpower. In the face of chaos, she doesn't see the problem, she sees the parameters of the situation. While I was spiraling into a vortex of catastrophic future events, she was calmly assessing the present. It was infuriating and incredibly reassuring all at once. We can't stay here, I countered, gesturing at the narrow road. This is a pull-out, not a campsite. A truck comes around that corner too fast and we're a hood ornament. I agree, she said. So, what's the plan? She looked at me expectantly. Not to have me solve it, but to start the collaboration. That's how we work. I panic, she grounds, then we plan. The plan? I scoffed. I don't know. Flag down a car, Hope someone speaks English and has a tow truck in their back pocket. We could, she mused, or we could walk. Remember that little village we passed about 3 kilometers back? The one with the church steeple. There has to be a mechanic there. Or at least a phone. I looked down the winding road we just climbed. 3 kilometers didn't sound like much, but it was all steep downhill. And what if there was nothing there? Just a collection of silent houses. It's our best shot, she said, already moving to the back of the van. She pulled out our small day pack and began filling it with a bottle of water, some granola bars, and our passports. Practical. Always practical. It's either that or sit here and wait for a miracle. And I've always found that miracles appreciate it when you walk to meet them halfway. I couldn't argue with her logic. Grumbling, I put a note on the dashboard, a poorly translated plea in Italian, courtesy of a phrasebook app, Macchina Rada. Torniamo presto, broken car. We'll be back soon. I locked up the Wanderer, giving it a final, mournful pat. It looked so forlorn, sitting there under the vast, indifferent sky. The walk down was beautiful, a fact that my sour mood tried its best to ignore. The air was warm on our faces, and the silence of the engine was replaced by the chirping of birds and the rustle of the wind in the pines. Cars and motorcycles whizzed past us, their occupants giving us curious looks. A few cyclists grunted a "ciao" as they sped by. "See," Karen said, squeezing my hand. "It's a lovely walk. We wouldn't be doing this if the van hadn't broken down." "I'd rather be driving it," I grumbled, but the tension in my shoulders had begun to ease. She was right, of course. We were so often focused on the destination that we forgot to appreciate the journey, even a forced one on foot. After about 40 minutes, we saw the terracotta roofs of the village below us. It was nestled in a small, bowl-shaped valley, looking ancient and peaceful. As we got closer, we could see that it was tiny, maybe only a few dozen houses clustered around a stone church. The odds of finding a state-of-the-art garage seemed slim to none. We entered the village square. It was deserted, save for an old man sitting on a bench, and a cat sleeping in a patch of sun. It was siesta time. The entire world, it seemed, was asleep. A single, small sign pointed down a narrow cobblestone alley, Autofficina Enzo. A tiny spark of hope ignited in my chest. An auto shop. We followed the sign to a large wooden door set into a stone building. It was closed. A hand-painted sign hanging on the door read, "Chiuso," with hours indicating he would reopen at 4 o'clock. It was 2:30. Of course, I sighed, slumping against the wall. Closed. We wait an hour and a half, and then try to explain a shredded serpentine belt to a guy who probably only speaks Italian and a local dialect. Karen, however, wasn't discouraged. She peered through a grimy window next to the door. "I hear someone moving around in there," she whispered. She knocked gently on the wooden door. There was a shuffling sound from inside, then a gruff, muffled voice shouted something in Italian that clearly meant, "Go away, we're closed." This is where I would have given up. I would have sat on the curb and waited until 4. But Karen is not me. She has a deep-seated belief in the fundamental goodness of people, and an uncanny ability to access it. She knocked again, a little louder this time. "Per favor," she called out, using one of her 10 words of Italian. "Aiuto. Problema con la macchina, please. Help. Problem with the car." The shuffling stopped. We heard a heavy bolt being drawn, and the door creaked open a few inches. A man's face appeared in the gap. He was probably in his late 60s, with a magnificent gray mustache, deeply tanned skin, and eyes that looked like they'd seen everything. He was wiping grease from his hands with a rag and looked thoroughly annoyed. He barked something at us, a torrent of rapid-fire Italian. I just stood there, helpless. This was the moment of truth. I launched into my well-rehearsed charade. I pointed up the mountain. I made a whirring motion with my hands to indicate an engine, then made a snapping sound and drew a wavy line in the air to signify a broken belt. I flapped my hands like a dying bird. It was, I'm sure, a pathetic and slightly insulting performance. Enzo just stared at me, his expression a perfect mixture of confusion and contempt. He shook his head and started to close the door. "No, wait," I said, a little desperately. Then, Karen stepped forward. She hadn't been watching my terrible mime act. She'd been looking past Enzo, into the small courtyard behind his workshop. There, a collection of terracotta pots overflowed with brilliant red geraniums and lush tomato plants, heavy with green fruit. She smiled warmly at the grumpy mechanic. She pointed to the courtyard. "Bellissimo," she said, her accent thick but the word clear. "Beautiful." She then pointed specifically to the tomatoes. "Pomodori, molto belli, very beautiful tomatoes." Enzo stopped. He looked from Karen, to his tomatoes, and back to Karen. The hard lines around his eyes softened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of pride crossed his face. He grunted something, no longer angry, but questioning. He opened the door a little wider. Karen continued, pulling out her phone and showing him a photo of our van. She pointed to the hood. "Rotto," she said simply. "Broken." Suddenly, a woman emerged from the house adjoining the workshop, wiping her hands on an apron. She was clearly Enzo's wife. She looked at us, at her husband's slightly bewildered face, and at Karen's hopeful smile. "He says, what is the problem?" the woman said, in heavily accented but clear English. Relief washed over me so intensely I felt lightheaded. "The belt," I practically shouted. "The serpentine belt broke. The alternator. The battery is dead." She translated for Enzo, who listened, nodding slowly, his eyes still on Karen. He let out a long sigh, looked up at the mountain in the direction we'd pointed, and then said something to his wife. "He says it is his siesta," she translated. "But his tow truck is very old. He likes a challenge." A small smile played on her lips. "And he says my sister in Milan also loves my husband's tomatoes. You have good taste." And just like that, the wall of language and frustration crumbled, brought down not by my frantic gesturing, but by a single, genuine compliment about a man's garden. It was a classic Karen moment. She had found the human connection, the small point of pride that opens the door. What followed was a slow-motion miracle. Enzo shuffled into the garage and emerged a few minutes later, driving a tiny, ancient, three-wheeled Piaggio ape that had been converted into a miniature tow truck. It looked like a toy. He grunted for me to get in. Karen stayed behind with his wife, who had invited her in for a glass of water. The ride back up the mountain in that tiny vehicle was terrifying and exhilarating. Enzo didn't speak a word, just expertly navigated the hairpin turns, the little engine screaming in protest. When we reached the Wanderer, he got out, surveyed the situation with a critical eye, and hooked us up with an efficiency that spoke of a lifetime of work. He towed us back down to the village, a slow, careful procession. When we arrived, Karen was sitting in the courtyard with Enzo's wife, Maria, laughing and sharing photos of our travels on her phone. They had become friends. Enzo got to work immediately. He confirmed my diagnosis with a grunt of approval, then disappeared into the back of his workshop, which was an alchemist's den of spare parts, old tools, and the accumulated history of every car he'd ever fixed. It was clear he didn't have a new serpentine belt for a 2018 Fiat Ducato. My heart sank again. But Enzo was a magician. He emerged with a belt that was slightly different, but looked plausible. He spent the next hour wrestling with it, modifying a fitting here, tightening a tensioner there. He worked with a focused, unhurried intensity. At one point, Maria brought him a small glass of red wine, which he drank in one go before returning to the engine. Finally, he wiped his hands on his rag, slammed the hood shut, and gestured for me to get in. "Avviare," he commanded. "Start." I turned the key, my breath held. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life, settling into a steady, beautiful hum. The battery light was off. Enzo stood by the open door, a rare, small smile creasing his weathered face. He gave a single, satisfied nod. He had won. When I tried to pay him, he waved his hand dismissively. He scribbled a number on a piece of paper that was laughably small, less than the cost of a fancy dinner back home. I tried to give him more, but he refused, shaking his head vehemently. Maria explained. He says the challenge was the payment. And the conversation, she smiled at Karen. He wants you to send a postcard from your next big adventure. As we were about to leave, Maria came out of the house with a small paper bag. Inside were 4 enormous, still warm from the sun tomatoes from Enzo's garden. A gift. We pulled out of the village, waving until they were out of sight. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the valley. We had lost the day, but we had gained something so much more profound. We hadn't made it to Paso Jau. We wouldn't get our photo from the top. But we had a story that was infinitely better. We found a small, quiet campground a few miles down the road. I parked the Wanderer, checking the engine one more time. It purred like a happy cat. That evening, we sat outside in our camp chairs, a pot of pasta on our small stove. Karen was slicing Enzo's tomatoes. The smell was incredible, sweet and earthy. She tossed them into the pan with some garlic and olive oil. You know, I said, watching her, I was genuinely panicked back there. I was already calculating how we'd have to sell the van and fly home in defeat. She laughed. I know. I saw your face. You get that little furrow between your eyebrows. But you were so calm, I continued. You looked at his tomatoes. Who does that? Who, in the middle of a breakdown, thinks to compliment a grumpy stranger on his gardening skills? She stopped stirring the pasta and looked at me. Because the van wasn't the point, John. The belt, the engine, that's just mechanics. The point was the person. He wasn't a grumpy mechanic, he was a man who was proud of his garden, who was enjoying his afternoon rest. My problem wasn't going to be more important than his peace unless I found a way to connect with his world first. We ate our dinner in a comfortable silence, the simple pasta dish tasting like the finest meal we'd ever had. The stars began to appear in the clear mountain sky, dense and brilliant. Later, as we sat there, wrapped in blankets, I thought about our old life. We lived in a world of efficiencies and transactions. If our car broke down, we'd call a service, a stranger would show up, we'd pay with a credit card, and the interaction would be over, forgotten. It was clean, simple, and utterly sterile. We would have gotten the problem solved, but we would have missed the entire experience. We would have missed Enzo and Maria. We would have missed the gift of the tomatoes. We would have missed the lesson. This is what this life, this van life after 50, has taught us. It has rewired our brains. It's not about avoiding the breakdowns, it's about what you find in the moments when you are broken down. It's about understanding that the most memorable parts of any journey are almost never the ones you have planned. They are the detours, the mishaps, the unexpected acts of kindness. For 30 years, we built a life designed to prevent problems. We had insurance for everything, steady jobs, a predictable routine. We had insulated ourselves from the sharp edges of the world. But in doing so, we had also insulated ourselves from its messy, unpredictable, breathtaking beauty. We had forgotten how to be vulnerable, how to ask for help, how to rely on the kindness of strangers. Karen never forgot. Her instinct is always to lead with humanity. While I'm trying to solve the logistical puzzle, she's solving the human one. And her way is always better. Her way leads to stories, to friendships, to gifts of homegrown tomatoes on a mountainside in Italy. So, why should every road trip be inspired by Karen's adventures? Because her adventures aren't about the destination on the map. They are about the human landscape you travel through. They are a reminder that a compliment can be more powerful than a tool, that patience is a currency, and that the best souvenirs are the stories you collect when everything goes wrong. Tomorrow, we'll try for Paso Jiao again. Or maybe we won't. Maybe we'll hear about another village, another little road that leads to nowhere in particular. The plan feels less important now. The destination is secondary. The journey, with all its potential for beautiful, chaotic, tomato-worthy breakdowns, is everything. We hope this little slice of our life on the road brings a bit of inspiration to you. What's the most unexpected thing that's ever happened to you on a trip? Let us know in the comments below. We love reading your stories. They remind us that we're all part of one big, adventurous family. Thanks for joining us for this part of our journey. Until next time, keep looking for the gardens, even when the engine is smoking. Keep living fully, 1 mile, 1 story at a time.